You're listening to the Balanced Educator Podcast, episode number 85. Welcome to the Balanced Educator. We're your hosts, Kaylee
and Josiane from EduCalm. Our intention is to equip and empower you to feel more calm, balanced, and joyful in all aspects of your life.
Hello there and welcome. We're so happy to have you here today. On today's show, we are going to be talking about success mindsets. We, over the past couple weeks, have been talking about growth mindset. So we've invited Ryan Gottfredson onto the show to share his perspective and his research on mindsets that lead to success in our lives. Before we get into the episode, we want to share about our awesome sponsor, Free Label. Free Label creates beautiful, sustainable clothing in a conscious and ethical way. We love them and we love wearing their clothes. They are a small Canadian business that we love to support because they make sure that their clothing is made by happy hands, and it feels good to us to be supporting a business that is creating more good and more kindness in the world. You definitely want to check out their fall line. They have these beautiful colors. Their fabrics are so luxurious and they last such a long time. They're just amazing quality. I am literally wearing head to toe Free Label right now as I record this because I'm always wearing Free Label. So comfortable. You have to check it out. Go to educalm.com/free label. That's educalme.com/free label. All right. So in today's show, we've invited Ryan Gottfredson, PhD. He's a mental success coach and cutting edge leadership consultant. He's an author, trainer, and a researcher. He helps to improve organizations, leaders, teams, and employees by improving their mindsets and mindfulness. Ryan is currently a leadership and management professor at the Mahalo College of Business and Economics at California State University, Fullerton. He holds a PhD in organizational behavior and human resources from Indiana University and a BA from Brigham Young University. He's the author of an upcoming book entitled Success Mindsets: The Key to Unlocking Greater Success in Your Life, Work, and Leadership. So today we are going to be getting into these success mindsets. One of them is growth mindset, which you've been hearing us talk a lot about recently, but there are 3 other mindsets that are really important for our success as well. So let's get into this awesome interview. Hello there, Ryan, and welcome to the Balanced Educator Podcast.
Thank you for having me on, Kaylee. I really look forward to this.
Awesome. So we're really excited to have you on the show because recently we've been talking a lot about growth mindset. And I know that's something that's important in what you talk about and that you're kind of an expert in this mindset area. So I'm really excited to share your interpretation of mindfulness with our audience, mindfulness and mindsets with our audience. So could you introduce yourself? Tell us a bit about you.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a leadership professor at Cal State Fullerton. And in addition, so what I focus on as a professor is half of my job is teaching. So I teach leadership and organizational behavior classes. I do research primarily on leadership and a variety of different topics. And one of those areas is dealing with mindsets. And then in addition to that, kind of on the side, is I do a fair amount of consulting and speaking to develop leaders and organizational cultures, all through a focus on mindsets. And so I have actually written a book called Success Mindsets. It's due out in the spring. I got my first copies of it, pre-release copies a couple weeks ago, so I'm excited for that to get out into the world. But I'm happy to talk about all things mindsets, and even if we get to mindfulness, that sounds great as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm really excited to hear about your perspective because you have your PhD in organizational behavior. I feel like that's going to be a really interesting perspective to chat about what it's like for teachers in the classroom, because we are leaders in our classroom. We tend to also be leaders within our school. And there's a lot that comes with organizing ourselves to have the behavior in our classrooms that we want. So we really like to talk about creating routines and habits and structures in our classrooms to really support our students and to help us get the outcomes that we want. So I feel like, with your interest in leadership and your studies in leadership, that's going to be a really good perspective to bring to the table. So I'd love to know, what brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, great question. We could probably spend all day just talking about that question. But in high school, I took a sports psychology class, and I loved the class. I ate it up. We read books by Stephen R. Covey, by Pat Riley, by Mike Krzyzewski. So that I was into sports and into leadership, come to find out, is I read these books and I just ate them up. And I remember thinking, man, if there was a job where I could just study leadership and help people become better, and along the way myself become better, that would be great. But I didn't know that there was a field of study out there that studied leadership. And so a few years later, I was living in Massachusetts and I met a Harvard Business School professor, and I asked him what he taught, and he said organizational behavior. And I said, what's that? And he went on to describe essentially my sports psychology class, but applied to business. And from there, it's like, I need to get into this field. So that set me on my path. I did my PhD at Indiana University in organizational behavior and human resources. And I landed on the focus on leadership. And one of the things that I have found when it comes to leadership research is that about 70% of all of leadership research focuses on helping leaders to become better through a focus on behaviors. In other words, answering the question, what do leaders need to do to be effective? And to put this in the context of teaching, because I agree with you, I mean, teachers are leaders, it would be suggesting, what do teachers need to do to be effective? But my guess is you would probably agree with me that leading and teaching is more than just doing the right things. It's about being a certain type of person. And when it comes to, and I think both leadership and teaching, it means that we need to be somebody that other people want to follow and want to listen to and to be influenced by. So how do we become that type of person is really what's driven the majority of my research over the last 6 or 7 years. And while I focus on a variety of different topics, I've settled on mindsets because I've found that they're foundational to literally everything that we do. And so if we can awaken to the power of mindsets, understand our own personal mindsets, we can unlock greater success in really every facet of our lives.
That's great. I love how you're putting the focus on, as the leader, we have to focus kind of on ourselves and where we're coming from. That's something that we talk about a lot on the show. Really, this whole podcast is to help teachers really have that self-reflection so that they can manage their own outlooks, their own mindsets, and then bring that to their students. It really has to be an internal personal work, that, personal development piece before we're ready to be the best leaders that we can be. And I know for myself, once I really started to dive into personal development, that's when I saw myself become a much better teacher and a much better leader, because I was finding out what my mindsets were and how those mindsets were either serving me or not serving me. So I'd love to know, from your perspective, what is a mindset?
Yeah, great question. I think that we can answer that at several different levels. I think at the basic level, our mindsets are the mental lenses that we wear that shape how we view the world. And how we view the world then goes on to shape how we think, how we learn, and how we behave. So again, as I mentioned, I think mindsets are really foundational to everything that we do, because how we see shapes how we operate. Mm-hmm. Another level that we can answer that is our mindsets are our mental fuel filters. Because when we are presented with a situation, we're bombarded by thousands, if not millions, of stimuli. And it's our mindsets, or these mental lenses, that filter in select information, and that select information goes on to fuel everything that we do. And so what this does is it allows different individuals to see the same exact thing, such as a challenge, but interpret it very differently. So one person could see a challenge as something to shy away from. Another one could see the challenge as an opportunity to learn and grow. And so how we see the world then shapes how we operate in that world.
Right. Yeah, that makes so much sense. I really love how you talk about that as it's like a lens, it's a filter, it's what our mindset really shapes how we interpret everything that happens to us, around us, and each person is going to have a completely different experience from the same situation just because of the lens that they're viewing that experience through. So I'd love to know now, how can our success in life, so thinking of, us as a teacher or also us as, guiding the learners in our classroom, how is our success and our students' success related to our mindset?
So what research has found is that 90% of our thinking, feeling, judging, and acting is driven by our non-conscious automatic processing. And so that means we essentially operate on autopilot the majority of the time. Well, guess what drives and dictates our autopilot? Well, it's our mindsets. And if you can imagine, as I say autopilot, I immediately think of flying. So if you can imagine we've got an airplane, their autopilot is just slightly off and you're flying a great distance. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means it's just going to take us longer to get to our destination than what we could have had our autopilot been more dialed in. And so the reality is that most of our autopilots, most of our mindsets aren't necessarily dialed into the most effective way of seeing the world. And this will probably come up in our conversation, but I've developed a mindset assessment that people could take, and it assesses a variety of different types of mindsets. And what I found, about 8,000 or 9,000 people have now taken the mindset assessment. Of those people, only 5% consistently have the positive mindsets that they need to have for the highest levels of success. And that means most of us, including myself, we've got work to do. Mm-hmm. Is that our autopilot dials just aren't necessarily tuned in to success. And if we can awaken to that, and if we can awaken to these subconscious or non-conscious processing, then, as I mentioned earlier, we become empowered to now do something about it. But the problem is that just most people aren't even aware of what mindsets they need to have to be successful.
Yeah, that really is the difficult thing with our mindsets. If our mindset is at the base and you have on that assessment, you have it visually as a pyramid with mindsets affecting how we view and interact with the world and then what our level of success is. If that mindset is at the base, but it's unconscious, meaning that we are not aware of it, how do we become aware of what those mindsets are? Because if you were to ask me, what is your mindset? Well, in my opinion, I would say, well, it's all great. Like I have positive mindset everywhere. Yep. Because that's my belief about myself. I'm always, working on my self-development, my personal development. So I feel like I'm really in a good place in all the mindsets. But then something will happen in my life that will bring to light that, oh, wait a minute, I didn't have as much of a growth mindset as I thought I did. Or, I don't have as much of a positive outlook as I thought I did. So it kind of takes these difficult moments in our life to show us what isn't quite working. But you said that you have an assessment. Can you talk a little bit more about how we can use that assessment to become aware of what our mindsets are?
For sure. Yeah, the assessment is on my website. It's ryangottfredson.com. It's free. Anybody could take it. And, I imagine you talk a fair amount about mindsets to people. Mm-hmm. And so let me ask you this question. If you were to ask a group of individuals, a group of teachers, can you identify any mindsets that we need to have to be successful? My guess is that you would probably get growth mindset as one answer. Could you get any other answers beyond growth mindset?
Growth mindset is at the forefront of a lot of teachers' minds right now. It's something that we talk about a lot, and we focus on a lot. But for myself, that was kind of the only mindset actually that came to mind for me. So the fact that you were measuring in your assessment more than one different mindset was kind of like, oh yeah, okay, it's not just growth mindset I need to focus on. It's other things too. So I would imagine that other teachers would also struggle to figure out what other mindsets we should be paying attention to.
Yeah. And so that's one of the keys here is if we don't have a clear label and definition and understanding of mindsets, it can never be something that we focus on. Mm-hmm. Because when I speak to leadership groups, they generally even haven't even heard of growth mindsets. So the answer that I most commonly get is, oh, we need to have a positive mindset, mm-hmm. which I don't disagree with, but what does that mean? And so when I started to read studies and research that articulated the power of mindsets, it led me to ask the question, well, what mindsets do I need to have to be successful? And the first place I went which is a place which any great academic will go, and I went to Google first. And so I Google essentially, what mindsets do I need to have to be successful? And the majority of articles that I found, while they had mindsets in the title of the article, they actually weren't even talking about mindsets. They were talking about skills or behaviors. And then there would be instances in which they would talk about fixed and growth. So that's the most visible set of mindsets. So I didn't feel like I got a very good answers from, I would just say, the popular press in terms of what mindsets do I need to have to be successful. So that's when I dove into the academic literature and I just opened the floodgates and said, what mindsets are out there that I need to be aware of that'll allow me to be successful? And what I found is that there's mindsets being studied in a variety of different disciplines. So education, psychology, management, and marketing. And across these different disciplines, they're studying their own unique mindsets, but they're really not talking to each other. And so what I've done with my mindset assessment and what I do in terms of my consulting is I've brought these different mindsets together into one framework that allows us to investigate our own personal mindsets. So when somebody takes the assessment, they're going to find out the quality of their mindset relative to the thousands of other people who have taken the assessment. So it's pretty objective data about the quality of your mindsets. And you brought up the example, which was, I think most people think that their thinking is the best way to think.
Yeah.
So we all think that how we see the world is the best way to see the world. And we all think that because if we thought we could see the world in a better way, we would have already done so already. And so part of this assessment is designed to help bring something that's been non-conscious to most people to now become conscious and something we could do something about.
That's great. And yeah, I found that I took the assessment myself and I found that it was just a really quick and easy way to bring, like you said, what was non-conscious to a conscious level so that I could say, oh, wow, okay, here's where I can work a little bit more to have a mindset that is going to serve me better and help me to have more success. So could you explain what these different mindsets are?
Yeah, for sure. I anticipate we'll probably dive in more to fixed and growth, but fixed mindset is when we see ourselves and others as being unable to improve our talents, abilities, and intelligence. And then when we have a growth mindset, we see ourselves and others as being able to change our talents, abilities, and intelligence. And that has a lot of downstream effects, which we could come back to. The second set is closed versus open mindsets. When we have a closed mindset, we're closed to the ideas and suggestions of others. When we're open to others' ideas and suggestions, and we're willing to take them seriously. Third is the difference between prevention and promotion mindsets. So when we have a prevention mindset, we're trying not to lose. We want to avoid problems. We don't want to take any risks. Whereas if we have a promotion mindset, we're focused on winning and gains. We have a destination that we're shooting towards, and we're focused on making progress towards that destination. The last set is inward versus outward. So when we have an inward mindset, we see ourselves as being more important than others. This causes us to see others as objects. When we have an outward mindset, we see others as being just as important as ourselves. And this allows us to see others as people and to value them as such. So as I talked about and defined very quickly these 4 sets of mindsets, one of the things you'll find is they come in a dichotomy, but in reality, they're representing a continuum. And we're going to stand somewhere within this continuum. And the research is really conclusive. It suggests that there is a negative side of the continuum and there's a positive side to the continuum. Now, don't get me wrong, because I've been on the negative side of each of these continuums. The negative sides are really easy to justify. But just because they're easy to justify doesn't mean that they lead to success. And so when people take the mindset assessment and they get a little defensive about sometimes they get negative results, the reason why they're getting upset is because they see how they think how they see the world is the best way to see the world, and they just haven't been exposed to alternative and more positive ways of viewing the world.
Right. Yeah. It's so easy after I took the assessment. I was kind of like shocked with one of them because, generally for the 4 different mindsets, I tended to be more on the positive side of things. But I was shocked when I saw that for open and closed mindset, I rated at a 4.8. And I was like, I always identified myself as someone that has an open mind. Like I always, if you were to ask me, are you open-minded? I'd be like, yeah, of course I am. So that was definitely an eye-opener for me. And at first I felt defensive, like, well, no, I have an open mind. And then when I started reading the explanation of what open versus closed mind, and I was able to see, oh yeah, some of those statements that you had listed in the explanation of what closed-minded, like, oh yeah, that is kind of how I think sometimes. So although it feels, at first you feel defensive, then I was grateful that, okay, well now I know what I can work on and what I can pay attention to. And now, after having taken that assessment, I've been noticing moments where I haven't been very open-minded, whereas before I wouldn't have recognized that I wasn't being as open-minded as I could, and then I was able to adjust and make changes. So I was really grateful for that, although at first I felt defensive.
No, and what I love about your description, because it's happened to me with all these mindsets. So welcome to the club.
Yeah.
But part of this is because I know you focus on mindfulness. Mm-hmm. Is to me, mindfulness is the combination of presence and awareness. And what you just demonstrated or discussed is that you are being mindful in that in these moments. Now we have some tools to evaluate ourselves, to become more aware, to be more present, sit with what's going on, and then make an adjustment. And the thing about, so the idea is we want to shift our mindsets to become more positive. And it requires what you just discussed, these times where we get mindful with ourselves and we actually sit back and what we're doing in our brain is we're tapping into neural connections that we don't typically rely upon. And the more we use those more positive neural connections, the stronger that they're going to become. And over time, what we're doing is we're shifting our mindset. So another way you can answer the question, what are mindsets, is there actually neural connections in our brain that are really strong and they fire rapidly. Now, those could be positive or negative. So somebody who's closed-minded might see some suggestion for improvement as a threat and get defensive, whereas somebody with an open mindset would see ideas for improvement as opportunities to learn and grow. And so how they see it is dictated upon what neural connection do they rely more heavily upon traditionally. More of the closed mindset neural connection or the open mindset neural connection. And if they're more closed-minded, then what needs to happen is we need to strengthen the open mindset neural connection that we do have. It's there. We've got to be present and aware in order to make that shift. And then as we continually do that, it becomes easier and easier, and we see ourselves shifting more to the positive. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I'd actually like to go a little bit deeper into that because we love talking about the brain on this show. I love talking about the brain. I am a little obsessive. So when you're talking about these neural connections, like the mindset is just a neural connection, meaning our brain is used to using it. So that's where it goes first. So can you talk a little bit about like how would we have developed this original closed-minded? For example, for me, I was a little bit more closed-minded, way more than I expected, because I had identified myself thinking I was open-minded. But how could I have developed this more closed-minded neural connection in my life? Like, was that my fault?
Not necessarily. I think you could put the blame on a wide variety of factors, including ourselves. So part of it, what research has found is part of our mindsets are affected by our upbringing. They're affected by our life's experience, and they're affected by our more immediate culture that we're involved in. And so all of those are going to play a role. I think in some instances, when it comes to particularly the closed versus open mindset, when somebody is an expert at something, it's really easy for them to be closed-minded, and it's really easy to justify our closed-mindedness. So I've been there, right? Is you start talking, let's just say you're talking to somebody about meditation. I imagine you probably know quite a bit about meditation. You're talking to somebody who doesn't know anything about meditation, and they're suggesting meditation is like the worst thing in the world, right? Our mind is naturally going to be, I'm close to whatever you have to say, right? But in those instances, even if they're giving us suggestions, and even if they're suggestions that we don't necessarily agree with, if we close ourselves off to their suggestions, then what is their likelihood of them presenting suggestions moving forward?
Right.
So if this is a relationship that we want to have, that they could add value in a variety of different ways, and we immediately shut down their ideas, even if we don't agree with them, what we're doing is we're creating a psychologically unsafe environment. And so as a whole, now we're perpetuating this closed mindset culture around us when that happens. And so it's really tricky. Another way to think about it is in terms of what desires do we have? So oftentimes with a closed mindset, one of the desires that we'll have is we want to be seen as being right. But that is different than an alternative perspective, which is I want to find truth and I want to think optimally. And so, if we have more of a closed mindset, we probably value being seen as being right. And that could get in the way of finding truth and thinking optimally. And so the culture sometimes dictates we need to be seen as being right. And if the culture dictates that, we're going to naturally gravitate there. Whereas if the culture suggests there's freedom to explore, there's freedom to find truth, to take in new ideas, that will help us to become more open. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. So let's now get into growth mindset, because that's something that we talk about a lot on the show. We've been talking about recently. It's kind of an area of mindsets that Josiane and I have been really interested in for a while, and that we like to teach about. And within our EduCalm Classroom mindfulness program for schools, we have 2 whole units that focus on developing growth mindset in ourselves and our students. So can we get a little bit more into what is the difference between a fixed and a growth mindset, and how we can move ourselves into the growth mindset to have more success in our lives?
Yeah, for sure. So as I mentioned before, when we have a fixed mindset, we don't believe that we and others can change our talents, abilities, and intelligence. So if we don't believe that we could change our talents, abilities, and intelligence, and we fail, how are we left to interpret that? Well, we're kind of left to interpret that as though we are failures. And so when we have a fixed mindset, our number one focus becomes avoiding failure. And along with that, we want to avoid challenges because challenges have a high likelihood of failure. So let me give you a couple of examples of how I've seen a fixed mindset play out in a variety of ways. So one is I have a nephew who really likes to play board games. And so we would play growing up. I would play Risk or Monopoly or Settlers of Catan with him. And if it ever got to the point where he knew that he was going to lose, he would topple the table, right? He would just throw the board, mess it all up so he couldn't continue playing. And the reason why he was inclined to do this is because he had a fixed mindset. Is he saw himself as not being able to improve, and that if he lost in this game, that meant that he was a loser. So that's kind of, and this is all, again, all going on subconscious to him, is that he has this belief that he can't change, which affects his ability to learn and grow. So he shies away from the opportunities to learn and grow because he's scared of these challenges and opportunities for failure, essentially. Another example is when I was a freshman in college, I moved away from home and I was thinking I wanted to become a medical doctor. And so I signed up for the Weeder chemistry course, and I promptly got the lowest grade I'd ever received. So I got a C that semester. So I passed the class, but lowest grade. So I had a fixed mindset, and what my fixed mindset caused me to think was, this didn't come naturally to you. You better change your major, right? Whereas I look back, I think with more of a growth mindset, I think, wow, like who would have, I just didn't even think, look, becoming a doctor is going to be really challenging. You may want to step up your study habits. Like I just mentally didn't even go there. So one of the aspects about having a fixed mindset is that if something doesn't come naturally to us, we're inclined to say this isn't for us and to give up. And this is really detrimental because success lies on the other side of whatever mountain it is that we need to climb. So if we're unwilling to take on that mountain as a challenge and see it as an opportunity, we're never going to reach the levels of success that we want to. So those are some of the basic aspects about how a fixed mindset affects us personally. Do you have anything to add there based upon what you've covered?
I was just going to mention that 2 episodes ago, I shared my experience when I first realized I had a fixed mindset. Again, one of those moments where I thought I had a growth mindset, but it then kind of was thrown in my face and made me realize like, wow, the way I'm looking at my education isn't working for me. And it was a very similar story to yours. I got a bad grade in biochemistry and recognized after having a chat with the teacher that I was basing my value on like the grade. And if I had a good grade, it meant I was smart. If I had a bad grade, it meant I wasn't smart, rather than seeing my education as an opportunity to learn new things. I was looking at it as this is where I need to get good grades to prove that I'm smart. So that was the first time that I kind of learned about growth or had an experience of recognizing that I didn't have a growth mindset. I didn't hear the term growth mindset for many years later, but that was my first encounter with having a fixed mindset and realizing I needed to change that.
And that's great, because what you're identifying here with that example is the associated desire that comes with a fixed mindset is wanting to look good. So it's the antithesis of, so instead of avoiding failure, we want to look good. And so that's kind of the MO for people who have a fixed mindset. Whereas the associated desire with those with a growth mindset is they don't care how they look, they want to learn and grow. And the thing that's really interesting about this is because what this brings up is I think we all have 2 competing desires. I think we all have desires to learn and grow, but we also have desires to learn, to look good. But they're competing because we can't learn and grow at our highest level unless we put ourselves in situations where we're going to look bad. And so, if you're listening to this, you can ask yourself, do I focus more on looking good, or do I focus more on learning and growing? And that'll give you a sense of where you stand on this continuum from fixed to growth.
Yeah. And the thing is, we're going to want to say, well, of course, I care more about learning and growing than looking good. But I would say for most people, and maybe you can, based on your assessment and all the results you've gotten, I would imagine that most people actually fall into the camp of trying to look good, because really that's what our society and even our education system has taught us up until now. It's starting to change now as we're recognizing that growth mindset and these other positive mindsets are more important for success than just getting good grades right now. It's starting to change, but for most of us, our whole life, we were very focused on getting good grades in school because doing well in school meant you were good and you were going to have success. And we didn't focus a lot on the importance of actually failing so that we could learn from our failures and actually grow at a faster rate if we give ourselves the chance to fail and give ourselves these bigger challenges that are going to require us to look bad for a little bit before we can, quote unquote, look good again.
Yeah. The thing that you bring up is really interesting in the educational space is that I think you're right. Like, our educational systems has traditionally emphasized grades, which when you emphasize grades, we're emphasizing this need to look good, which is attached to this fixed mindset. And something that's really interesting is because obviously much of talking about fixed and growth mindsets has come about because of the research of Carol Dweck, who has some really compelling findings showing that having a growth mindset will make you more successful in your academic careers. And I don't know how closely you follow fixed and growth mindsets, but in the last year, there's been several studies and meta-analyses that have come out and said fixed and growth mindsets may not be all that it's cracked up to be. Because across a meta-analysis, what we found is that in some cases, a growth mindset intervention leads to higher academic performance. Other cases, it has zero effect on academic performance. And then in even other cases, it has a negative effect on academic performance. And so there's some people that are out there that are suggesting, look, fixed and growth mindsets may not be all that it's cracked up to be. And I don't buy into that. And the reason why is because, and I think that this is something that they fail to recognize, is that if you engage in a growth mindset intervention, and you're, as a student, you're exposed to, let's just say, even a 15-minute training or a 1-hour training, which is usually the intervention that's done, and then you get put back into your classroom, which is emphasizing grades, like, how can you expect that fixed mindset to stick around? Like, it's not going to happen. And the same goes for our home. Like, if we're promoting a growth mindset at school, but at home your parents are kind of driven by a fixed mindset, well, the effect of the growth mindset intervention at school is going to be dampened or limited by the context of that's going on at home. And so I think there's nothing that would suggest to me that there isn't value in putting an emphasis on growth mindset. Yes. But what it does suggest to me is there's a huge amount of value of creating a culture where a growth mindset could thrive, because any intervention isn't going to last unless that's the case.
And I would add to that too, in these analysis, if we are measuring whether growth mindset helps us to achieve better grades, we're not really understanding what growth mindset is, because again, in order to learn and grow, we might need to have a lower grade because we're taking a class that is challenging us more, or we are, instead of doing a project on something that comes easy to us, we're choosing in that course to take on a project that is more of a challenge, therefore getting a lower grade, but having more learning occur. So I think the measure of measuring whether growth mindset helps us get good grades isn't even the correct measurement. And rather it would be, and which would be something hard to measure. So it's probably not going to happen anytime soon. But the question really is, does having a growth mindset have a larger influence on whether we feel successful in our life or have success in our life versus is getting good grades a measure of success in our lives? Because I think most of us, the people that did well in school doesn't necessarily mean that they are successful in life. So is grades the right measure that we should be looking for? And in my opinion, I might get slapped on the wrist because I'm a teacher, but I don't think grades are the most important thing.
Yeah, and they're not a bad thing, and they shouldn't be the only thing, right? And what you brought up is that's the best, most efficient way we know how to measure how a student is doing. And so it's important to have an assessment like that, but at the same time, if we're not providing room for students to fail, they're never gonna take the liberty to fail in an effort to learn and grow. And so we now become much more focused on how we look, and we essentially what we're doing. And I was there through my upbringing is I cared more about my grades than actually the substance in my brain. So I was a facade. I was somebody who did the minimum amount in order to get an A grade. Well, did I gain any value from that? Well, I got some value, but I look back and I think, wow, there's a lot of missed opportunities there for sure.
Yeah, totally. And I think a lot of people would totally relate with that as well, including myself. There's been lots of times where, my focus was just on getting the good grade and doing what I needed to do to get the good grade rather than focusing on, am I learning this? Am I retaining this for the long term? Is this something I'm going to be able to reteach to someone else later? Or am I just cramming in information to be able to hold on to it just up until the test and then it's all gone? So is learning happening here, or am I just memorizing for a good grade on a test?
Yeah. And it's really tricky for students, right? Because there is this social kind of pressure to focus on grades. But as you talk about this and as we awaken to these ideas, what it does is it empowers us to be more conscious about the approach that we take towards our education or even toward our teaching. So once we're just become aware of this, now we become empowered to, even within a culture that doesn't necessarily support a growth mindset, we could still be intentional about our mindsets. And this allows us to be able to do so.
Yes, definitely. I love that. So what I'm hearing you say a lot here is really the importance is about, creating a culture for teachers. What can we do to instill a growth mindset in our students? It's really about creating a culture, at least within the classroom as best as we can, of putting the emphasis on growth mindset rather than looking good right now with a good grade. It's about talking about the importance of the learning process rather than the final outcome, and giving our students the space and the encouragement to be allowed to make mistakes. And then how do we talk about those mistakes? So are we, saying, oh, here's your mistake, here's how to fix it? Or are we giving the child, the student, the opportunity to evaluate what they're learning and what their next steps will be, which isn't always easy, but is something that I'm seeing changing within education. And I'm hopeful will continue to change even more.
Yeah, I'm there with you. Yeah, and I think those are great ideas, is allowing them to fail, or even asking them, tell me about a time when you failed, or tell me about a time when you made a mistake. What did you learn from it? What are you going to do different next time? And just having those conversations are small little interventions that are working the growth mindset neural connections. And the more regularly we can do that, the more we are going to strengthen those neural connections.
That is so great. Thank you so much for that. So my next question is, we've talked about your assessment, and I encourage, all of our listeners to take that assessment. It was super helpful for me. And actually, interestingly enough, we had first come into contact talking about having you on the show months ago. So I took the assessment months ago. And then in the last few months up until now, I've been really learning a lot more about growth mindset and really practicing and trying to identify where I've had a fixed mindset in my own life and working on that for myself. And I found it very interesting because I retook the assessment yesterday and got different results this time around and saw a big jump in my my mark on the growth mindset category. So it's really cool to see that once I was able to identify that, oh, I didn't have as much of a growth mindset as I thought, and then I worked on that on myself, I was able to see that grow. So it's nice to see that these are things that can change once we've identified it. So what would you suggest once someone takes the assessment, what is the best course of action to start changing these mindsets in the 4 different categories to become more on the positive side of the spectrum?
Yeah, great question. I think one of the things is probably take them one at a time. So isolate one that you want to focus on. And I think that shifting our mindsets isn't, I guess let me back up and say, I think one of the reasons why I really love focusing on mindsets is because these are things that we can change. There's a lot of other assessments out there like personality assessments or strengths assessments. But the theory behind all of that is these are things that we can't change. And they're valuable because they help us know a little bit about ourselves and they help us better understand how we navigate our social environment. But there's really not a developmental component to it. But mindsets is something that we can change. And once we change our mindsets, they have a tendency to stick around on a pretty long-term basis. Now, we could always revert back. But so if we want to go about shifting our mindsets, I think it's not too different than learning how to count to 10 in a different language and becoming fluent in that. And I think the steps are about the same. So what do you think? As I say, learning how to count to 10 in a different language, well, I'm going to imagine you don't know Swahili, but do you think you could learn how to count to 10 and become fluent in counting to 10 in Swahili?
Yes, definitely.
In a decent amount of time?
Yeah, right? I think so.
This is doable. Is it easy? Is it going to be easy? Well, not necessarily, but it's definitely doable, right?
Yes.
And so the steps of this is first we need to learn the names associated with the numbers. So the same thing goes with mindsets. We need to learn the labels associated with the mindsets. We need to understand, what they are and what their implications are. So that's largely kind of what we've done while we've been talking. Is we're starting to just become aware of the labels of these mindsets. Then once we have the labels, what we need to do is just like if we learn the words associated with numbers, we need to practice on a regular basis. So we need to spend 5, 10, 20 minutes every day or on a regular basis. In the course of a month or two, we're going to become fluent in counting to 10 in Swahili, for example. So the same thing goes with our mindsets, is we need to engage in small, regular interventions that are designed to promote the more positive mindset neural connections. And as the more we work them out, the stronger they become and the more we rely upon them moving forward. And so all of the research on mindset suggests that one intervention could have effects for up to 2, sometimes 4 weeks. But if we could stack interventions on top of each other, now we're starting to see a shift that's much more permanent in nature.
Right. Yeah, that's great. So one thing that's coming to mind right now is just, a thought that we keep on thinking becomes a belief. So if we're thinking the thoughts that go with these mindsets as we're practicing these mindsets, as we're kind of taking in more information on these mindsets, it's, thinking about it until it becomes unconscious. So consciously choosing to look at ourselves and what our mindsets are and, take in more information about the positive side of the mindset until it just becomes natural for us and then it becomes unconscious. But then once it's unconscious, we have to find ways again to bring it up to the conscious again to see has this mindset stuck around? Is it still serving me or do I have more work to do?
Yeah. And so when somebody takes the mindset assessment, it'll come with links or examples of what they can do in terms of these small interventions. And it ranges from watching videos, reading books, having conversations with other people. I think the more that we talk about these things, the more that's going to prime the more positive neural connections. So there's a variety of resources there included with the assessment results.
Oh, that's great. Awesome. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for being on the show today. This was an awesome conversation. How can our audience keep in touch with you if they want to learn more about you and if they want to check out your assessment?
Yeah, for sure. My website is probably the best place for people to connect. I do a weekly newsletter. People can subscribe to that if they're interested, and take the mindset assessment. I'm also on LinkedIn. I don't know how many teachers are on LinkedIn, but I'm there as well. And just maybe a short little plug is keep an eye out for my book, Success Mindsets, which will be ebook will be February and print copy will be May of 2020.
Awesome. Well, I'm definitely going to want to get my hands on that book and read it and work on my mindsets.
Awesome.
Awesome. We'll also include links to your website on our blog and podcast at educalm.com. Thank you again so much, Ryan.
Yes, thank you, Kaylee. Really appreciate it.
I hope you guys enjoyed listening to this interview as much as I enjoyed leading this interview. I really love talking about growth mindset and the mindsets that create our perspectives. Now, if you also love talking about growth mindset and you're interested in learning how to implement growth mindset more in your classroom and getting ready to use resources to bring growth mindset activities into your classroom, we invite you to join us on November 7th in Winnipeg for a full day workshop on growth mindset. So in the morning, we'll be talking about what growth mindset is, really going into a lot of depth on that. And then in the afternoon, we're going to be showing you exactly how to implement the lessons and activities that we have in EduCalm Classroom into your classroom, and you'll leave with those resources. So ready to use resources so that when you get back to your class, you can get started right away and you don't have any extra work to do before you're able to start teaching this to your students. If you want to check out that workshop and sign up, go to educalm.com/training. And for links for the things that we talked about today in the episode, including links to Ryan's website and his mindset assessment, go to educalm.com/TBE085, as in the Balanced Educator, episode 85. So educalm.com/TBE085. Thank you so much for spending your time with us here. We appreciate you, and we are so proud of all the amazing work you're doing in the world. Thank you for being part of the EduCalm community. Have a great week.